The $47 million sitting in my private accounts felt lighter than the designer heels I wore as I walked across the marble floors of the Sterling mansion tonight. I was here to watch the sound of crystal crack. 3 years after being thrown out of my own family's empire, I finally walked back into their world of marble floors, gold-trimmed banisters, and that scent of pine and perfection that used to define my parents' idea of success. The Sterling estate in the Hamptons glittered like a snow globe, flawless from the outside and freezing within. I told myself I was just here for one evening, to keep up appearances, but as soon as I set down the small gift I'd brought, my father's laughter cut through the Christmas carols. "Don't worry, Madison," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "We'll make sure you can afford dessert this year." The room erupted in laughter. Everyone except me. The dining hall gleamed with crystal and silver like a photograph in Architectural Digest. The chandelier above scattered golden light across the mahogany, catching on the glasses of champagne my family lifted like trophies. Outside, snow fell soundlessly over Long Island, covering the world in a calm that didn't reach this room. Inside, every word sparkled with status, every glance measured worth. I felt like a ghost moving through someone else's Christmas dream. The perfection wasn't warm. It was the cold, hard gleam of expectations that had shaped every moment of my life. Dad, Jonathan Sterling, 62, still carried himself like the tech mogul he'd built his reputation as. Shoulders squared, voice commanding. Even in semi-retirement, he spoke as if he still controlled every startup in Silicon Valley. "Our portfolio's up 43% this quarter," he announced to no one in particular, swirling his scotch. The Sterling name still means something in venture capital. Mom, Vivian, fluttered beside him in midnight blue silk, adjusting her sapphire earrings every few seconds. "Presentation is everything, darling," she liked to say. She didn't need to say it tonight. Everything about the evening screamed presentation. Across the table, my brother Ethan poured wine into his girlfriend's glass. Ethan had inherited Dad's arrogance but amplified it by 10. He was the golden son, the one who stayed in the family business, the one who did everything right according to their playbook. His girlfriend, Sloane Montgomery, leaned close to whisper something in his ear, and they both laughed. She was beautiful in that sharp-edged way that money polishes to perfection. Glittering, loud, expensive, and completely hollow. "Madison," she said, flashing me a smile that could cut glass. "It's been forever. What are you up to these days? Still doing that little creative thing?" She tilted her head like she was talking to a particularly slow child. Before I could answer, Ethan chimed in with a smirk. "She was working as a social media manager somewhere, right? After leaving the firm, I mean." He didn't bother to hide the satisfaction in his voice. Dad chuckled, setting down his glass with deliberate emphasis. "She wasn't fired, sweetheart," he told Sloane, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension he'd perfected over decades. "She just wasn't equipped for real business. We all have our natural limitations. We just wanted her to find something more suitable to her abilities," Mom added smoothly, her tone suggesting she was discussing a family pet that had failed obedience training. Something less demanding. The words slipped around me like familiar chains. Polite, polished, and perfectly designed to humiliate while maintaining plausible deniability. They were masters of this particular art form. I kept my smile in place, though it felt like holding broken glass between my teeth. "I'm managing just fine," I said softly. Dad raised his eyebrows in theatrical surprise. "Managing? Is that what we're calling it these days?" He laughed again, reaching for his glass with the deliberate slowness of a man who knew everyone was watching. "Well, at least someone's paying your rent. I hope." My fingers tightened around my cloth napkin until my knuckles went white, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned the power of silence over these past 3 years. Let them talk. Let them perform. Let them believe what they needed to believe to sleep at night. Maria, our longtime housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of roasted duck with winter vegetables. She gave me a small, knowing smile, the kind that said she saw more than she let on, more than any of them gave her credit for. "Merry Christmas, Miss Madison," she whispered as she passed, her voice barely audible above the clinking of silverware and the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace nearby. as the plates were served with a kind of precision that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Sloane leaned forward, her voice taking on that syrupy sweet tone that meant she was about to twist the knife. "You know, Madison, you should have seen the guest list at Ethan's firm's holiday party." The mayor was there, a Supreme Court justice's wife, people who really made something significant of themselves. "Not everyone's into politics, Sloane," I said, maintaining my smile with the determination of someone defusing a bomb. "Of course not," she replied, her laugh tinkling like breaking glass. "Some people just don't have the connections, or the vision." Ethan laughed again, loud enough to ensure Dad heard every word. Mom sipped her wine with the practiced elegance of someone who'd been performing grace under pressure for 40 years. "It's perfectly fine, dear," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of maternal disappointment that had haunted my childhood. "Not everyone has to be successful in the traditional sense. Some people bring other kinds of value to the family dynamic." That stung more than anything else they could have said. Other kinds of value. That was her elegant way of saying none at all. I watched the snow through the floor-to-ceiling windows, my reflection faint and ghostly against the glass. Once I had dreamed of being part of this family with genuine pride, of earning their respect through achievement and dedication. But years of cold smiles and cutting remarks had turned me into the quiet daughter who no one expected anything from anymore. Maybe that had been my greatest advantage all along. Now they'd never see me coming. Dad raised his glass again, the crystal catching the light from the chandelier above. "A toast," he declared, "to the family, even the ones who can't quite handle the pressure of real business." The laughter that followed filled the room like static electricity before a storm. My heart tightened in my chest, but my expression remained perfectly still, perfectly controlled. I met his eyes across the table and lifted my own glass with deliberate slowness. "2 lessons learned," I said, my tone calm as still water, "even if some of us take a little longer to apply them properly." His confident grin faltered for just half a second, like a glitch in a perfect performance. Then he barked out another laugh. "Just make sure those lessons help you pay your bills, sweetheart. Reality has a way of demanding payment." Mom dabbed at her lipstick with her napkin and murmured, "Jonathan, really?" But she was smiling too. That practiced smile that said she found his cruelty amusing rather than concerning. In that moment, something inside me went perfectly, crystallinely still. The old Madison would have broken down, would have argued, would have begged for scraps of respect like a dog under their table. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I hadn't been her for a very long time. I reached for my phone beside my plate, pretending to check the time with the casual disinterest of someone who had somewhere more important to be. The screen lit up with a notification at the top, and my pulse steadied as I read the words that would change everything. "Goldman Sachs Private Banking, Miss Sterling. Your acquisition of Sterling Ventures has been finalized. Congratulations on your controlling stake. Total transaction value, $2.3 billion. I blinked once, slowly, then locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my clutch with the same casual motion I'd used to pick it up. My pulse remained steady. Not yet. Not quite yet. Maria caught the subtle movement, her experienced eyes missing nothing as she moved around the table refilling water glasses. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw her confusion shift to dawning understanding as she registered the change in my expression. I placed a single finger against my lips, our old childhood signal for keeping secrets. She nodded almost imperceptibly and turned back toward the kitchen, her face carefully neutral. The conversation at the table rolled on, as empty and predictable as a script they'd been performing for decades. Ethan talking about market penetration and growth trajectories. Dad analyzing tech trends with the confidence of someone who believed his own press releases. Sloane name-dropping the Fortune 40 under 40 list she swore Ethan would make next year. "You know what it really comes down to, Madison," Dad said, his voice taking on that lecturing tone that had defined so many of our conversations over the years, "is vision. People who lose their vision lose everything. That's exactly what happened when you left Sterling Ventures. You lost your way." I smiled faintly, swirling the wine in my glass like I was contemplating something philosophical. Or maybe I just found a different path to the same destination. He frowned, uncertain whether I'd just complimented him or challenged him. The distinction had always been difficult for him to parse. Mom rose gracefully to refill her glass, her movements as choreographed as a dancer's. "Anyway, let's keep the mood festive," she said quickly, her voice carrying just a hint of nervous energy. "It's Christmas Eve, not a board meeting." "Of course," I murmured, still watching the snow fall outside in fat, lazy flakes that caught the light from the house and glittered like scattered diamonds. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9, its deep, resonant chime echoing through the house like a countdown. The fire popped and crackled, scattering tiny orange sparks up the chimney. Somewhere upstairs, the old Steinway began playing a soft, melancholy version of Silent Night. Maria's doing, I was certain. She'd always had a gift for creating atmosphere. For a moment, the laughter and conversation dimmed, and all I could hear was the ticking of that ancient clock and my own measured breathing. I thought about the years I'd spent rebuilding my life from absolutely nothing. Working 18-hour days in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls, teaching myself coding and digital marketing while living on ramen noodles and determination. I thought about every insult, every dismissive laugh, every dinner exactly like this one where they'd looked right through me as if I were invisible. And then I thought about the message still glowing in my notification history, the one that proved everything I'd sacrificed had been worth it. They thought I'd come back broken and desperate, crawling home with my tail between my legs to beg for scraps of acceptance. What they didn't know was that the woman they were mocking over their expensive dinner now owned the very company that had made their wealth possible in the first place. I set down my wine glass, letting the crystal base click softly against the polished mahogany table. The sound was almost lost beneath the gentle piano music drifting down from upstairs, but it made Dad glance up for just a second. Our eyes locked across the table, his still full of comfortable pride and unquestioned control, mine calm and utterly unreadable. I smiled the kind of smile that held secrets. "Merry Christmas, Dad." He nodded dismissively, already turning back to his captive audience of investors and social climbers. But I didn't mind his dismissal anymore. Tonight was only the beginning of a very different kind of conversation. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick, silent curtains, covering the manicured landscape in pristine white. Inside, the candles flickered over faces too sure of their own power to see the earthquake that was about to reshape their entire world. I leaned back in my chair, my expression as serene as the snow-covered gardens beyond the windows, and listened to the clock's final chime fade into the expectant silence. They thought I was their greatest failure. But this Christmas, I was about to become their most expensive lesson. The conference room at Sterling Ventures felt more like a tribunal than a workplace that gray December morning. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a view of Manhattan that was supposed to inspire, but instead felt like looking out from inside a fishbowl. The air conditioning was turned up too high, making everything feel thin and cutting. I'd spent 18 months working my way up from junior associate to project lead, burning through weekends and holidays, dreaming of the day I could prove to my father that I was capable of more than just carrying the Sterling name like decorative luggage. Instead, I stood there with sweating palms as he flipped through a stack of papers that contained my professional death sentence. "This proposal is absolutely embarrassing," Dad said without looking up, his voice flat and final. "Completely over budget, behind every deadline we set, and fundamentally misaligned with our client's brand identity." I swallowed hard, tasting copper. The initial focus groups had mixed responses, but I submitted a comprehensive revision strategy that addressed every concern. He raised one manicured hand, cutting me off with the casual authority of someone who'd been silencing people for decades. "Excuses don't generate returns on investment, Madison. Our clients don't pay us premium rates to hear about your learning curve. They pay for results." Around the imposing conference table sat 8 senior partners, all men over 50, all silent, all watching this public execution with the kind of detached interest usually reserved for nature documentaries about predators. Ethan occupied a seat at the far end of the table, his Armani tie perfectly knotted, his expression as unreadable as carved marble. He'd joined the company 6 months after me, but had already been fast-tracked to senior associate, thanks to Dad's personal mentorship and what everyone politely called family synergy. I searched his face desperately for any sign of support, any indication that blood might be thicker than business politics. There was nothing, less than nothing. If I looked carefully, I could almost see satisfaction glittering behind his professionally neutral expression. Sterling Ventures has built its reputation on excellence, Dad continued, finally looking up from the papers with the kind of cold disappointment I remembered from childhood piano recitals and parent-teacher conferences. We don't reward mediocrity here, not even when it shares our DNA. The words hit like physical blows. Not even when it shares our DNA. He might as well have tattooed it on my forehead. You'll resign immediately, he said with the same tone he might use to order lunch. Human Resources will handle the transition paperwork and coordinate your exit interview. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. The words seemed to echo strangely in the sterile air of the conference room. You're firing me? He leaned back in his leather chair, folding his arms across his chest like a judge delivering a sentence. I'm teaching you that the business world doesn't operate on nepotism and good intentions. You'll understand someday when you're older. Failure builds character, assuming you're resilient enough to learn from it instead of just wallowing in self-pity. A barely audible chuckle drifted from someone near the floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt heat flood my cheeks, that familiar burning sensation that had haunted me through every childhood embarrassment. Dad, I said quietly, my voice smaller than I'd intended. I worked 18-hour days for this. You told me that if I prove myself capable, I told you to earn your place, he snapped, his facade of paternal patience finally cracking. And you failed. Spectacularly. Mom had always said that Dad's worst character flaw was his inability to distinguish between leadership and domination, between strength and cruelty. Sitting there in that glass box, surrounded by men who were paid to agree with him, I finally understood what she meant. He wasn't angry about the campaign that had gone over budget. He wasn't even particularly disappointed in my professional performance. He was furious that I dared to try leading on my own terms, that I'd attempted to build something without asking his permission first. The meeting ended without ceremony or discussion. Papers shuffled with the sound of expensive suits rustling. Chairs scraped against polished floors. One by one, they filed out like jurors leaving a conviction, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly relieved that the unpleasantness was over. Ethan lingered as the room emptied, straightening his cufflinks with deliberate precision. It's not personal, Madison, he said softly, though his eyes glittered with something that looked an awful lot like triumph. Dad just has very high standards. He expects perfection. Perfection or blind obedience? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled then, really smiled, and for a moment I saw the brother who used to pull my hair and break my toys, and then cry to Mom when I retaliated. Same thing in this business, little sister. By the time I reached the elevator, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the button. My entire adult life had revolved around that building. Early mornings, late nights, weekend strategy sessions, endless attempts to prove I belonged in their world of handshakes and hostile takeovers. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Tired, small, utterly defeated. I looked exactly like what they'd always told me I was. A disappointment wrapped in an expensive education. I promised myself, standing in that descending box, that I would never again let them see me beg for anything. I packed my office in complete silence while my former colleagues pretended to be busy with important work that couldn't wait. The new intern, my replacement, a perky blonde with an MBA from Wharton and connections that actually mattered, offered me an awkward, practiced smile. Mr. Sterling asked me to wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors, she said, the words clearly memorized from some corporate script. Luck, the consolation prize for people without power or connections. Outside Sterling Ventures' gleaming tower, snow was beginning to fall just like tonight, 3 years later. The same fat flakes, the same silent accusation from a gray December sky. I walked 4 blocks through the developing storm before my legs simply gave out. I found myself sitting on a frozen bench near Washington Square Park, watching Christmas shoppers hurry past with their arms full of bags and their faces full of purpose. The December wind cut through my wool coat like it was tissue paper. The city lights blurred through tears I hadn't meant to shed, hadn't given myself permission to cry. My phone buzzed against my thigh. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and I almost sent it straight to voicemail. Almost. Madison. Her voice was crisp, controlled, already managing the narrative. "You'll be coming home tonight, I assume." "I'll find my own place," I said through chattering teeth. "Don't be ridiculous," she replied with the kind of laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "People will ask questions. We'll simply tell them you're taking some time to reassess your career goals. A sabbatical. Very fashionable these days." "I'm not ashamed of what happened," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Well, we are," she replied before the line went dead. That night, I rented a studio apartment on the Lower East Side, a shoebox with water stains on the ceiling, and a radiator that clanked like a dying robot. But it was mine. Completely, utterly mine. And no one could take it away from me as long as I could make the rent. I spent Christmas Eve alone in that tiny space, eating Chinese takeout straight from the carton while sitting on an air mattress I'd bought at a drugstore. The contrast with the Sterling family's legendary holiday celebrations was so stark it felt surreal, like I'd fallen through a crack in the universe into some parallel dimension where I didn't exist. The annual Sterling family portrait appeared in Business Week the following month. Dad, Mom, Ethan, and his then-girlfriend Sloane, all smiling in front of a Christmas tree that probably cost more than most people's cars. The caption read, "The dynasty behind America's most innovative venture capital firm." My name wasn't mentioned. I'd been erased as efficiently as a computer file. The months that followed were survival in its most primitive form. I sent out hundreds of resumes to every firm in Manhattan, took interviews that went nowhere, and slowly watched my savings account dwindle toward zero. Every rejection email ended with the same polite variation. "We've decided to pursue candidates with stronger industry references." Stronger, meaning approved by Jonathan Sterling, meaning anyone but his disgraced daughter. I worked temporary jobs that paid just enough to keep me fed and sheltered. Freelance social media management for small businesses that couldn't afford real marketing firms. Content writing for websites I'd never heard of. Data entry that made my eyes burn and my soul shrivel. People in our old social circle started calling me that Sterling girl. The broken one. The disappointment. The cautionary tale about what happens when privilege meets incompetence. The absolute lowest point came on a snowy night in February. I stood outside Sterling Ventures Tower, looking up at the lights still blazing on the 40th floor where Ethan's corner office was located. I wondered if he ever thought about me, or if I'd already been completely erased from the family narrative. My reflection in the building's glass lobby looked back at me, hair flat from the snow, coat 3 years out of style, face hollow from too many dinners of convenience store ramen. For the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't recognize the person staring back. Then came the twist that would change everything, disguised as just another day of professional rejection. One of my temp agencies placed me as a social media coordinator at a small digital marketing firm in Brooklyn, Chen Digital Solutions. They handled clients the Sterlings would have laughed at. Independent artists, small e-commerce stores, local restaurants trying to build online communities. I sat at a desk that wobbled unless you wedged a folded napkin under one leg, managing Instagram accounts for organic dog treat companies and handmade jewelry designers. But slowly, quietly, I started learning things they'd never taught at Sterling Ventures. I learned that real marketing wasn't about manipulating people with bottomless budgets. It was about creating genuine connections with audiences who had choices. I learned that success could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with quarterly profit reports. Most importantly, I learned that I was actually good at this work in a way I'd never been good at anything in my old life. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday in March. I was working late, optimizing ad campaigns for a small skincare company run by 2 women who'd started their business in their kitchen. Their organic face cream had gained a small but passionate following, but they couldn't afford the kind of marketing budget that would get them into major retail stores. I spent the weekend analyzing their customer data, mapping out demographic patterns, and building a targeted social media strategy that would cost them less than $1,000, but reach exactly the right audience at exactly the right time. Monday morning, their sales had increased by 300%. By Wednesday, 3 other small businesses had called asking if I could help them with their Instagram problem. By Friday, I was booked solid for the next month. That weekend, I registered Sterling Digital as an LLC, working from my kitchen table with a laptop I'd bought used from a pawn shop. The irony of using the family name for my own independent business wasn't lost on me. It felt like the first genuinely rebellious thing I'd ever done. The first year was chaos held together with caffeine and desperation. I worked 16-hour days, sleeping 4 hours a night on the same air mattress, learning video editing and graphic design and data analytics through YouTube tutorials and sheer necessity. But slowly, carefully, the numbers started to grow. 1 client led to 3, 3 led to 10, 10 led to 30. Small businesses across New York started talking about that Sterling girl who actually understood social media. Food bloggers recommended me to restaurant owners. Boutique designers passed my name to jewelry makers. Word spread through networks I'd never known existed. Communities of entrepreneurs and dreamers who built their success through creativity and persistence rather than inherited connections. By the end of the second year, Sterling Digital was managing social media for over 200 small businesses across the tri-state area. By the end of the third year, we'd expanded nationally, and I'd hired a team of 12 people who were just as passionate about helping underdogs succeed as I was. And that's when the real opportunity presented itself. TechCrunch ran an article about Sterling Digital in October, calling it the boutique marketing firm that's democratizing social media success. The article mentioned that we generated over $50 million in additional revenue for our clients that year alone. The article caught the attention of Goldman Sachs' venture capital division. More specifically, it caught the attention of investors who were looking for ways to diversify their portfolios beyond traditional tech startups. Social media marketing was exploding, and firms like mine, firms that actually delivered measurable results for real businesses, were becoming incredibly valuable. The initial meeting was supposed to be exploratory. I walked into their Midtown offices expecting to discuss maybe a small business loan or a line of credit to help with expansion. Instead, they offered to buy Sterling Digital for $47 million. I sat in their conference room, marble and mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows just like the one where Dad had fired me, staring at a contract that would make me wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. But there was a condition. A beautiful, perfect, poetic justice kind of condition. Goldman Sachs wanted to package Sterling Digital with several other acquisitions into a new venture capital fund. They were planning to target established VC firms that had undervalued digital marketing capabilities. Firms exactly like Sterling Ventures. The managing director, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Martinez, leaned across the table and asked the question that would reshape my entire life. How would you feel about acquiring your father's company? I stared at her for a long moment, processing the implications. You're asking me to buy Sterling Ventures? We're asking you to lead the acquisition, she corrected. Your digital marketing expertise, combined with our investment capital, gives us a significant advantage. Sterling Ventures has been hemorrhaging clients for the past 18 months. Their traditional approach to marketing is becoming obsolete. I thought about Dad's dismissive laughter, about Ethan's smug superiority, about 3 years of living on ramen noodles while they told everyone I was a disappointment. I thought about every family dinner where they'd made me feel small, every business conversation where they'd talked around me like I wasn't there, every time they'd used my name as a punchline. What would I have to do? I asked. Rebecca smiled. Make them an offer they can't refuse. The research phase took 6 months. Goldman Sachs' investigation team was thorough to the point of being surgical. Every contract, every client relationship, every financial report from Sterling Ventures was examined and analyzed. What they found was worse than I'd expected. Dad's firm was hemorrhaging money. Their traditional approach to venture capital, identifying promising startups and providing capital in exchange for equity, was sound in theory, but they'd completely missed the digital revolution that had transformed how businesses actually operated. While they were still funding companies the same way they had in the 1990s, their more agile competitors were providing not just capital, but comprehensive digital marketing support that dramatically increased their portfolio companies' success rates. Sterling Ventures' portfolio companies were failing at nearly twice the industry average. Client satisfaction was at an all-time low. 3 major institutional investors had already pulled out, taking over $100 million with them. The company Dad had built into a Manhattan powerhouse was slowly, quietly, dying. The acquisition strategy we developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than announcing our intentions and getting into a bidding war, we would acquire Sterling Ventures through a series of smaller transactions that would give us controlling interest before anyone realized what was happening. First, we purchased the debt of several companies in Sterling Ventures' portfolio, companies that were struggling and needed immediate capital injection. This gave us leverage over nearly 30% of their active investments. Second, we bought out 3 of their smaller competitors, firms that specialized in exactly the kind of digital marketing integration that Sterling Ventures lacked. This gave us market position and made us an attractive merger partner. Third, and most importantly, we waited. We waited for the quarterly reports that would show Sterling Ventures' continuing decline. We waited for the client departures that would make them desperate for new revenue streams. We waited for the moment when they would have no choice but to accept our help. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November. "Madison?" Ethan's voice was different over the phone. Smaller, less certain than I'd ever heard it. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly." "Not at all," I said, leaning back in my office chair and looking out over the Manhattan skyline from the 32nd floor of my new headquarters. "What can I do for you?" We're exploring some strategic partnerships," he said carefully. "Dad mentioned that your marketing firm has been doing well." I smiled. Dad had mentioned it, which meant he'd been forced to acknowledge my existence when potential partners started asking why Sterling Ventures was the only major VC firm in Manhattan without any digital marketing capabilities. "Sterling Digital has been growing steadily," I said with deliberate understatement. "We're always open to interesting collaborations. Would you be interested in meeting? Maybe we could find some synergies between our portfolio companies and your marketing services." Synergies. The corporate euphemism for, "Please help us before we go out of business." "I'd be delighted," I said. "Why don't you come by our offices next week? I'll have my team put together a presentation." "Actually," Ethan said quickly, "Dad was hoping you might come to dinner first, family meeting before business meeting. Mom's been asking about you." I stared out at the city below, watching tiny people hurry along sidewalks like ants, all of them convinced their individual struggles mattered in the grand scheme of things. "That sounds lovely," I said finally. "When were you thinking?" "Christmas Eve? We're having a small gathering. Just family and a few close business associates. Christmas Eve. 3 years to the day after he'd sat in that conference room and watched Dad destroy my career without saying a word. "Perfect," I said. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, watching the sunset over Manhattan and thinking about the strange geometry of revenge, how it could take years to travel in a perfect circle, how it could arrive wearing the mask of an invitation, how it could taste like wine and sound like Christmas carols. My assistant knocked and entered with a stack of contracts requiring signatures. "Ms. Sterling, the Goldman Sachs team is here for the 4 o'clock meeting." "Send them in," I said, straightening my jacket and preparing to finalize the purchase of my father's empire. 3 years ago, they told me I wasn't good enough to work for them. Tonight, they were about to discover they weren't good enough to work for me. The invitation arrived exactly as I'd expected it. Cream-colored cardstock with raised lettering, sealed with the Sterling family crest pressed in gold wax. Mom had been sending invitations exactly like this for 20 years, each one a small work of art that announced wealth and taste in precisely calibrated doses. "Miss Madison Sterling," the envelope read in her perfect Palmer Method script. No warmth, no familiarity, just my name floating in elegant black ink above the family address. Inside, a single card announced, "Sterling Family Christmas Eve Celebration. We would be honored by your presence. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Business casual attire requested." Business casual. The small addition made me smile. Mom never specified dress codes for family dinners unless she wanted to send a message. Business casual meant this wasn't really a family dinner at all. It was a negotiation disguised as a holiday celebration. I set the invitation on my desk next to the stack of acquisition documents I'd been reviewing and called Rebecca Martinez at Goldman Sachs. "They took the bait," I said when she answered. "Christmas Eve dinner?" "Christmas Eve dinner. Ethan called it a family meeting before business meeting. They're planning to ask for help with their portfolio companies." Rebecca laughed. "They have no idea you already own 15% of their client base. They have no idea about a lot of things," I said, "including the fact that their largest institutional investor is planning to pull out after the new year." "Are you ready for this?" I looked out my office window at the Manhattan skyline. glittering with lights from 1,000 office buildings where people were working late, chasing dreams, building empires, or watching them crumble. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said. The week leading up to Christmas Eve was a masterclass in strategic patience. Sterling Digital's year-end numbers came in stronger than we'd projected. $63 million in revenue, $47 million in profit, and a client satisfaction rating that put us in the top 5% of marketing firms nationally. More importantly, the acquisition documents were finalized. As of December 23rd, I owned controlling interest in Sterling Ventures through a complex web of subsidiary purchases and strategic partnerships that would take their lawyers months to untangle. But they didn't know that yet. The plan was elegant. Let them make their pitch for partnership. Let them grovel for the help they desperately needed, and then reveal that the decision was no longer theirs to make. Christmas Eve dawned gray and cold, with snow threatening in the heavy clouds that hung over Long Island like a down comforter. I drove out to the Hamptons in the Tesla I'd bought myself as a celebration gift, taking the scenic route through snow-covered suburbs that sparkled with Christmas lights and careful prosperity. The Sterling estate looked exactly as I remembered it, massive, immaculate, and designed to intimidate anyone who wasn't already wealthy enough to take it for granted. The circular driveway had been cleared of snow and lined with luminarias that cast dancing shadows across the pristine white landscape. Maria met me at the door, her face lighting up with genuine warmth that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. "Miss Madison," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. "You look wonderful, successful." "Thank you, Maria. You look exactly the same," she laughed, stepping back to study my face. "You look different, though. Stronger. Like you found something you were looking for." "Maybe I did," I said, handing her my coat. Inside, the house was decorated with the kind of understated elegance that cost more per room than most people's entire holiday budgets. White roses, silver ribbons, crystal ornaments that caught the light from the chandeliers and scattered it in rainbow patterns across the walls. I could hear laughter drifting from the main dining room. Dad's booming voice, Mom's musical trill, Ethan's practiced chuckle, and other voices I didn't recognize. The business associates, probably. Witnesses to whatever performance they had planned. "They're waiting in the dining room," Maria said softly. "Miss Madison, be careful tonight." I squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about me. I'm not the same person who left here 3 years ago." She nodded, her eyes bright with something that might have been pride. "No, you're not. You're better." The dining room looked like a photograph from Architectural Digest. Every surface gleaming, every detail perfect, every element calculated to project wealth and power. The mahogany table was set for 12, with china that had been in the family for generations, crystal that caught the light from the chandelier above, and silver that reflected our faces in distorted funhouse mirror fragments. Dad stood at the head of the table, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He raised his glass as I entered, his smile the practiced one he used for business dinners and political fundraisers. "Madison," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of the warmth he used to reserve for clients he was trying to impress. "You look prosperous." In Sterling family code, prosperous was a backhanded compliment that meant better than we expected but still not quite at our level. "Thank you, Dad. You look well, too." Mom appeared at my elbow, air-kissing my cheeks with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. She was wearing emerald green silk that complemented her sapphire jewelry, and her hair was arranged in the kind of casual updo that took 3 hours and a professional stylist to achieve. "Darling, we're so glad you could make it," she said, her voice pitched at exactly the right frequency of maternal warmth. "It's been far too long." Ethan approached with Sloane on his arm, both of them wearing smiles that looked like they'd been applied with a makeup brush. Sloane had upgraded her ring since the last time I'd seen her. The diamond was now large enough to serve as a small mirror. "Madison," Ethan said, extending his hand for a shake that lasted precisely the right amount of time to convey professional respect without actual warmth. "Thank you for coming. I know how busy you must be." "Never too busy for family," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a server who appeared and disappeared like well-trained smoke. The other guests were exactly what I'd expected. A mix of Sterling Ventures' remaining major clients and potential investors, all of them dressed in variations of expensive casual that suggested wealth without ostentation. They looked at me with the polite interest reserved for family members who might be useful, but probably weren't important. Dad raised his glass again, commanding attention with the unconscious authority of someone who'd been the center of attention for most of his adult life. To family, he declared, and to the partnerships that make success possible. We all drank, the crystal chiming softly as glasses touched lips. The champagne was exceptional. Dom Perignon, probably from a year when I was still in high school, and believed that someday I'd be standing here as an equal rather than a curiosity. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, each one more elaborate than the last. The conversation flowed around topics I recognized from 100 similar dinners. Market trends, political connections, the kind of industry gossip that passes for real information when you're wealthy enough to believe your opinions matter more than other people's facts. Sloane leaned forward during the second course, her smile bright and sharp as surgical steel. Madison, we've been hearing such interesting things about your little marketing company. It sounds like you found your niche. Your little marketing company. The casual diminishment was expertly deployed. Sterling Digital has been growing steadily, I said, cutting my duck with deliberate precision. We've been fortunate to work with some amazing clients. Oh, how lovely, Mom said, dabbing at her lips with her napkin. Small business work must be so fulfilling. Small business work. Another perfectly calibrated insult disguised as interest. Very fulfilling, I agreed. There's something satisfying about helping entrepreneurs build their dreams from the ground up. Dad leaned forward slightly, his business instincts finally overriding his social conditioning. I have to admit, Madison, I've been following your company's progress with some interest. Your growth numbers are quite impressive for a boutique firm. Boutique firm. He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that Sterling Digital was actually larger and more profitable than several of his portfolio companies. Thank you, I said simply. In fact, Ethan said, glancing at Dad as if seeking permission to continue, we've been discussing some potential synergies between Sterling Ventures and Sterling Digital. Our portfolio companies could really benefit from the kind of specialized marketing support you provide. Specialized marketing support. They couldn't even say social media without making it sound like something slightly embarrassing. That's an interesting thought, I said, taking a sip of wine. What kind of arrangement were you thinking? Dad's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory interest I remembered from his most successful business dealings. Well, we were thinking of a partnership structure. Sterling Ventures would provide you with access to our client base, and you'd provide marketing services at a preferred rate. Exclusive arrangement, of course. Exclusive arrangement. He wanted to own my company without actually buying it. What kind of preferred rate? I asked. We were thinking 60% of your normal fees, Ethan said quickly, in exchange for guaranteed volume and long-term contracts. 60%. They wanted me to cut my prices by nearly half, in exchange for the privilege of working with companies that were already struggling to survive under Sterling Ventures' traditional management approach. I smiled and set down my fork. That's certainly an interesting proposal. We think it could be mutually beneficial, Mom added, her voice taking on the encouraging tone she'd used when I was 7 years old and reluctant to eat my vegetables. Steady income, prestigious clients, family working together again. Family working together again. As if the problem had been distance rather than their fundamental inability to respect anything I'd accomplished independently. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'd need to review Sterling Ventures' portfolio performance before committing to anything that significant. Dad's smile flickered for just a moment. Our portfolio performance is strong, very strong. I'm sure it is, I said, but you'll understand that any partnership arrangement would require full financial disclosure, due diligence, market analysis, projected growth rates, all the standard business intelligence. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I saw Ethan shoot a worried glance in his direction. Of course, Dad said finally, though I should mention that some of our client relationships are sensitive. Confidentiality would be essential. Sensitive, which meant they were probably in even worse shape than my research had indicated. Naturally, I said, I assume you'd want to review Sterling Digital's financials as well. Fair is fair. Absolutely, Ethan said quickly. Though I'm sure your numbers are quite solid for a company your size. A company my size. They still thought they were dealing with their memory of me, the failed daughter playing at business while the adults handled real money. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages as if checking something important. Actually, I just received some year-end numbers that might interest you. Sterling Digital's revenue for this year was just over $63 million, with a profit margin of about 74%. The silence that followed was profound. Dad's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. Mom's eyes widened slightly. Ethan's mouth actually opened a little, like he was preparing to speak, but couldn't remember what words were supposed to sound like. Sloane was the first to recover. 63 million? That's quite impressive for a boutique firm. It's been a good year, I agreed modestly, though I should probably mention that we've been approached by several acquisition firms. Goldman Sachs has been particularly interested in our client retention rates. Dad set down his glass with deliberate control. Goldman Sachs? They're putting together a venture capital fund focused on digital marketing integration, I said, taking another sip of wine as if I was discussing the weather. They seem to think traditional VC firms that don't adapt to digital marketing trends are going to struggle in the current market. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Dad's face had gone slightly pale, and I could see him processing the implications. His company was exactly the kind of traditional VC firm that Goldman Sachs would consider vulnerable. That's interesting, he said finally. The market is certainly evolving. It's moving incredibly fast, I agreed. Companies that don't adapt quickly tend to get left behind. Mom cleared her throat delicately. Well, this is certainly exciting news about your success, dear. We're very proud of what you've accomplished. Very proud. 3 years too late, and motivated entirely by the fact that I was now worth more than they'd expected. Thank you, I said. Though I should probably mention that the Goldman Sachs opportunity comes with some interesting requirements. Dad leaned forward, his business instincts overriding his parental pride. What kind of requirements? I smiled and reached for my phone again. Well, they're interested in acquiring established VC firms that would benefit from digital marketing integration. They've actually asked me to evaluate several potential targets. The room went completely silent, except for the soft clinking of crystal and the distant sound of Christmas music playing somewhere in the house. Targets? Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Acquisition targets, I clarified. Firms that have strong traditional business models but need digital marketing capabilities to remain competitive. I let the implication hang in the air for a moment, watching their faces as they realized what I was really saying. In fact, I continued, pulling up an email on my phone, I just received confirmation of our first acquisition. A Manhattan-based venture capital firm with excellent real estate and client relationships, but declining quarterly performance. Dad's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for his water glass. Which firm? I looked directly at him, my expression calm as still water. Sterling Ventures, I said quietly. As of this afternoon, Goldman Sachs, through Sterling Digital, now owns controlling interest in your company. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment that stretched like eternity, no one moved. The only sounds were the soft crackle of the fireplace and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then Dad's wineglass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor, sending red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. What did you just say? His voice was barely above a whisper. I said. I repeated calmly, setting down my own glass with deliberate precision, that as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I own 51% of Sterling Ventures, controlling interest to be exact. Mom's hand flew to her throat, her sapphire necklace catching the light as her fingers trembled against the stones. Ethan's face had gone completely white, and Sloane looked like she was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in her head. That's impossible, Ethan said, his voice cracking like he was 16 again. You're making this up. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the confirmation email from Goldman Sachs. Would you like to see the documentation? I have the signed acquisition papers right here. Dad stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. You expect me to believe that you bought your company? I finished gently. Yes, Dad. I did. through a series of strategic acquisitions over the past 8 months. It's amazing what you can accomplish when people consistently underestimate you. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of several guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One of the business associates, a man I vaguely recognized from industry magazines, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should," he began, but Dad cut him off with a sharp gesture. "This is impossible," Dad said, his voice growing stronger as denial gave way to anger. "Even if this is true, you can't just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built." "I'm not destroying anything," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "I'm saving it. Sterling Ventures has been hemorrhaging clients and capital for the past 18 months. Your portfolio companies are failing at twice the industry average. 3 major investors have already pulled out." His face went from white to red to white again. "How do you know that?" "Because I did my research," I said simply. "Due diligence, market analysis, financial projections. All the things you taught me were important in business. Remember?" Mom found her voice, though it trembled like a leaf in a storm. "Madison, sweetheart, surely we can work something out. This is still a family business." "You're absolutely right, Mom," I said, my smile as sharp as broken glass. "It is a family business. And as the majority owner, I'm making some changes to how this family does business." Ethan shot to his feet, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "You can't do this. We're your family. This is revenge." "No," I said quietly, my voice cutting through his panic like a blade through silk. "This is business. Remember that word, Ethan? The one you used to justify firing me 3 years ago? That was different," he protested. "That was about performance." "You're right," I agreed. It was about performance. And Sterling Ventures' performance has been dismal. As the new majority owner, I'll be making some executive changes to improve our numbers. Dad's hands were shaking as he gripped the back of his overturned chair. "What kind of changes?" I smiled and walked toward the window, looking out at the snow-covered gardens that had been my playground as a child. "Well, first, I'll be restructuring the executive team. We need fresh blood, new ideas, a more innovative approach to venture capital." "What does that mean exactly?" Mom asked, though I could tell from her voice that she already knew. I turned back to face them, my expression serene as moonlight on snow. "It means that effective January 1st, I'll be assuming the role of CEO. Ethan will be transitioning to a senior associate position, assuming he's interested in staying with the company." Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Senior associate? I've been running day-to-day operations for 2 years, and doing a remarkable job of running them into the ground," I said pleasantly. "Don't worry, though. I'll make sure you receive all the mentorship and guidance you need to succeed in your new role." The words were delivered with exactly the same condescending tone he'd used with me 3 years ago, and from his expression, he recognized the echo. Dad slammed his fist down on the table, making all the crystal jump. "This is outrageous! I won't stand for it." "Actually," I said, consulting my phone again, "as a minority shareholder, you don't really have a choice. Though I should mention that I've prepared a very generous retirement package for you. Full pension, medical benefits, and consulting fees for the next 5 years." "Consulting fees?" he repeated numbly. "I'd like you to help with the transition," I explained. "Your institutional knowledge is valuable, and I want to make sure we preserve the best parts of Sterling Ventures' legacy while modernizing the parts that need updating." It was a masterpiece of strategic humiliation, offering him just enough respect to avoid complete destruction while making it clear that he now worked for me. Mom had recovered enough composure to attempt damage control. "Madison, dear, this is all very sudden. Perhaps we should discuss this privately as a family." "I think we're past private family discussions, Mom," I said gently. "But you're welcome to stay on as the company's director of client relations. Your social connections are still valuable, and I think you'd enjoy the work." Director of Client Relations. A made-up title that would let her keep her dignity while removing any real power. Sloan, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Madison, you have to understand how shocking this is. We had no idea you were in a position to do something like this." "I know," I said, my voice soft with something that might have been sympathy. I spent 3 years making sure you wouldn't see it coming. I walked back to my place at the table and picked up my purse, extracting a business card with deliberate ceremony. This is Rebecca Martinez from Goldman Sachs. She'll be in touch next week to discuss the transition timeline and answer any questions you might have about the new ownership structure. Dad stared at the card like it might explode. You planned this. All of it. Coming here tonight. The dinner invitation. I planned to succeed. I corrected. Everything else was just circumstances aligning in interesting ways. I moved toward the dining room entrance, then paused and turned back to face them one last time. Oh, and Dad? That retirement package I mentioned? It's contingent on your cooperation during the transition. I'd hate for things to become unpleasant. The threat was delivered with the same gentle smile he'd used when firing me, and I saw him recognize the symmetry. Maria appeared in the hallway as I collected my coat, her eyes shining with something that looked an awful lot like pride. Miss Madison, she whispered as I passed. That was magnificent. I squeezed her hand. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. I always knew you were special, she said. They just forgot how to see it. As I walked to my car, I could hear raised voices through the dining room windows. Shock, anger, disbelief, all blending into a symphony of consequences finally coming due. The snow crunched under my feet, the only sound in an otherwise silent night. I looked back once at the glowing windows of the house that had shaped my childhood, the mansion that had been both my prison and my proving ground. For 3 years, that building had represented everything I couldn't have, everything I'd been denied, everything that had been taken away from me. Now it was just another property in my portfolio. When I reached my car, I rolled down the windows and let the cold air fill my lungs. It tasted like freedom and possibility, and the sweet, sharp satisfaction of a promise finally kept. I'd told them 3 years ago that failure builds character. Tonight, they'd finally learned what I meant. The Sterling Ventures offices on the 40th floor of the Chrysler Building looked exactly the same, but felt completely different. The mahogany and marble and floor-to-ceiling windows were unchanged, but the energy was transformed. Sharper, more focused, crackling with the kind of ambitious electricity that comes when people believe they're building something meaningful, rather than just protecting something inherited. I stood in what used to be Dad's corner office, looking out over Manhattan, while my assistant briefed me on the morning's schedule. The view was spectacular, Central Park stretching like a green carpet toward the Hudson River, the city's geometric perfection laid out below like a 3-dimensional chessboard. The Goldman Sachs partners meeting is at 9, Claire said, scrolling through her tablet with practiced efficiency. The portfolio review with the new team is at 11, and you have lunch with the TechCrunch reporter at 1. What about the Sterling Digital Quarterly Report? 96% client retention, 23% revenue growth over last quarter, and a satisfaction rating that puts us in the top 1% of marketing firms globally. I smiled, still watching the city wake up below. And Sterling Ventures? Even better news. Portfolio company performance is up 38% since the integration began. 3 companies have already hit their Series B funding goals ahead of schedule, and we've signed 4 new clients this month. The transformation had been swift and surgical. By combining Sterling Ventures' traditional capital investment approach with Sterling Digital's marketing expertise, we'd created something unprecedented in the venture capital world, a firm that didn't just fund startups but actually helped them succeed through comprehensive digital strategy support. The results spoke for themselves. Our portfolio companies were thriving. Our client waiting list was 6 months long, and we'd been featured on the covers of both Forbes and Businessweek as an example of venture capital evolution. More importantly, we were profitable in ways that went beyond simple financial returns. We were helping genuine entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses instead of just gambling on the next potential unicorn. Any word from the family? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Claire's expression softened slightly. Your mother called yesterday. She wanted to know if you're coming to Easter dinner. Easter dinner. 6 months after Christmas, and they were still trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality where I held all the cards. Dad had taken early retirement, as expected, though he'd spent his first few months of freedom traveling to European art auctions and sending me occasional emails with suggestions for improving company operations. I responded to each one politely, but never implemented any of his recommendations. Ethan had surprised everyone, including himself, by thriving in his new role as a senior associate. Without the pressure of living up to Dad's expectations, he'd revealed a genuine talent for identifying promising early-stage companies and building relationships with innovative entrepreneurs. We'd actually had coffee together the week before, the first normal conversation we'd had since childhood. Mom had embraced her role as director of client relations with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found work that matched her actual skills. She was exceptional at managing the social and cultural aspects of client relationships, and her network of connections had brought us several high-profile partnerships. The strange thing was that they all seemed happier, lighter, as if the old power structure had been as suffocating for them as it had been humiliating for me. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Martinez. Board meeting confirmed for next month. Are you ready to discuss the IPO timeline? IPO, initial public offering. Taking Sterling Ventures public would value the company at somewhere between $8 and $12 billion, depending on market conditions and investor appetite for innovative VC models. It would also make me one of the youngest billionaires in American business history. I typed back, "Let's do it." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, Dad had fired me for being unsuited for executive leadership. Next month, I'd be ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Claire cleared her throat gently. "Ms. Sterling, should I tell your mother you'll be at Easter dinner?" I considered the question while watching a hawk circle above Central Park, hunting for prey among the carefully manicured trees and walking paths. Easter dinner with the family, ham and asparagus, and polite conversation about weather and politics, and anything except the fact that their former disappointment now controlled their financial futures. 3 years ago, I would have said no out of pride. 6 months ago, I would have said no out of spite. Today, I realized I could say yes out of choice. "Tell her I'll be there," I said, "and ask if she needs me to bring anything." Claire smiled. "I think she'll like that." After she left, I sat behind my new desk, the same desk where Dad had fired me, the same mahogany surface where I'd once signed my resignation letter with shaking hands, and opened my laptop to review the morning's reports. Sterling Digital had signed 3 new Fortune 500 clients overnight. Sterling Ventures had just led a $15 million Series A round for a renewable energy startup founded by 2 women from MIT. The Sterling Foundation, the charitable arm I'd established using the company's profits, had awarded its first round of entrepreneurship scholarships to 12 first-generation college students. I thought about the girl who'd sat in this same chair 3 years ago, humiliated and heartbroken, convinced that her value was determined by other people's opinions of her worth. That girl couldn't have imagined this morning, this office, this view, this life, but she'd had something that turned out to be more valuable than their approval. The stubborn, quiet conviction that she could build something better on her own terms. The phone rang. Claire's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Sterling? The Goldman Sachs team is here for the 9 o'clock. "Send them in," I said, straightening my jacket and preparing for another day of building the future they'd told me I wasn't capable of creating. Outside my window, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon, glittering with possibility and promise, and the beautiful, chaotic energy of 8 million people chasing their dreams. Some of them would succeed, some would fail. Some would discover that the difference between the two had less to do with talent or luck than with the willingness to keep building when everyone else was ready to quit. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was time to teach others. The Sterling legacy would continue, but it would be built on foundation of resilience rather than arrogance, innovation rather than tradition, and the radical idea that success was something you created rather than something you inherited. Christmas had been about settling old scores. Everything since then had been about writing a new story. And this story was just beginning. The TED Talk stage was smaller than I'd expected, but the audience was everything I'd hoped for. 2,000 entrepreneurs, students, dreamers, and skeptics, all waiting to hear what the Sterling Ventures miracle could teach them about building businesses in an economy that changed faster than anyone could predict. I stood in the wings, listening to my introduction, trying not to think about how different this moment was from that Christmas dinner 5 years ago, when my family had assumed I was broke and desperate. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Madison Sterling, CEO of Sterling Ventures, founder of Sterling Digital, and Forbes' Entrepreneur of the Year. The applause was thunderous as I walked onto the stage, but all I could think about was Maria, watching from the front row with tears in her eyes and a smile that could power the entire convention center. I'd flown her first class from New York for this speech, put her up in the presidential suite at the Four Seasons, and told her she was the guest of honor at the after-party. She'd raised me as much as my parents had, and she deserved to see what her faith had helped create. 5 years ago, I began, looking out over the sea of expectant faces, I was fired from my family's company for being unsuited for executive leadership. A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the audience. Today, that same company is worth $12 billion, employs over 3,000 people, and has helped fund more than 200 successful startups. More applause, but I held up a hand for quiet. I'm not telling you this to brag about my success. I'm telling you because the most important thing I've learned about business, about life, is that other people's opinions of your potential have absolutely nothing to do with what you're actually capable of achieving. The audience leaned forward, sensing the emotional weight behind the words. When I was 25 years old, I believed that my worth was determined by whether my family respected my ideas. I thought that success meant earning their approval, and failure meant disappointing them. I paused, thinking about that girl who'd sat in a freezing studio apartment on Christmas Eve, eating takeout Chinese food and wondering if she'd ever amount to anything. It took me 3 years of sleeping on an air mattress and eating ramen noodles to realize that the only approval that matters is the approval you give yourself to keep trying when everyone else is ready to quit. The silence was complete now. 2,000 people hanging on every word. Success isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about the quiet moment when you look in the mirror and realize that the person staring back at you is exactly who you always knew you could become. I spent the next 20 minutes talking about practical strategies, how to bootstrap a business with no capital, how to identify underserved markets, how to build authentic relationships with customers, how to scale operations without losing your company's soul. But the heart of the message was simpler than any business strategy. The radical notion that you don't need anyone's permission to chase your dreams. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted for 3 minutes. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a young woman approached me during the reception. "Ms. Sterling," she said, her voice barely audible over the cocktail party chatter. "I just wanted to thank you. I was laid off from my marketing job 6 months ago, and I've been too scared to start my own business because my family thinks it's too risky." She paused, gathering courage. "After hearing your speech, I'm going to file the paperwork tomorrow." I handed her my business card. "When you're ready for your first client, give me a call." Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "Sterling Ventures has a budget specifically for supporting entrepreneurs who remind us why we got into this business in the first place." Later that night, I called Ethan from my hotel room. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear his kids laughing in the background. "How did the TED Talk go?" he asked. "Better than expected," I said. "Though I may have just committed us to funding another dozen startups," he laughed. "Dad would have a heart attack. Dad's too busy with his art collection to care about our business strategy anymore." "True. He bought another Monet last week. I think retirement suits him." We talked for a few more minutes about portfolio companies and family gossip and Easter dinner plans. The conversation was easy, comfortable in a way that would have been impossible 5 years ago. "Madison," Ethan said before we hung up, "I know I never said this properly, but I'm sorry. About what happened before. About what we all put you through." I looked out my hotel window at the San Francisco skyline, thinking about forgiveness and family and the strange algebra of success. "We all did what we thought we were supposed to do," I said finally. "The important thing is that we figured out how to do better." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, thinking about the journey from that awful Christmas dinner to this moment. The girl who'd been told she wasn't good enough had become a woman who got to decide what good enough meant. The family that had once been built on control and hierarchy had been rebuilt on respect and collaboration. The company that had nearly died from its own arrogance had been reborn as something that actually helped people achieve their dreams. It hadn't been about revenge, ultimately. It had been about resurrection, taking something broken and making it whole, taking something small and making it significant, taking something that existed only for itself and transforming it into something that existed for others. My phone buzzed with a notification from Forbes. Sterling Ventures announces $500 million fund for women-led startups. Tomorrow's story, already written and waiting for the world to read it. I smiled, finished my wine, and started planning the next chapter. Because the most beautiful thing about success isn't reaching the destination. It's realizing that there's always another mountain to climb, another dream to chase, another person to help find their own path to the summit. The Sterling name would continue to mean something in business, but now it meant something different. Proof that the best revenge against being underestimated is becoming exactly who you always knew you could be, and building a ladder behind you so others can follow. If Madison's story resonated with you, share your thoughts below, because every story of resilience inspires the next person to keep fighting for their dreams, even when no one else believes they're possible.